The concept reclaiming the republic that I came up with, this concept for this show, Reclaiming the Republic, really spawned out of my two books. I've written three books. The first two have been published. The third I'm holding on to. The first book covers four basic books, and the second book is really the fifth book. I call them sections in my writing, and I've broken it down. In the first section, I cover a historical narrative of liberty. And in this, I basically tie this concept of a civil war of ideologies going all the way back to the war in heaven. And we see this civil war of ideologies taking place since heaven, Adam and Eve, and so forth. Every society always struggles with these concepts of subjugation or individual liberty. And actually, I tie in individual liberty and individual sovereignty, because in subjugation, one loses not only your liberty, but your sovereignty, because whoever the subjugator is, or the enslaver is, they dictate what you will do, and they have the ultimate say over every facet of your life. So in other words, one can, boil it down to slavery and liberty, but I think it's very important that we include individual sovereignty, because I've yet to meet a person, whether they're progressive or whether they're conservative, that they like to have the final say over what they do. And very rarely will they be quick to say, well, I want to be a subject to the state. They'd like to theoretically say, well, the state ought to make those decisions, and state ought to make those decisions. But quickly, when it comes to their advantage or things that they garner important to them, they want to have the final say over those things. And once we begin to lose our sovereignty and our liberties, John Adams claims that there is no way we can gain them back other than by revolution. And many people have heard his quote. And Franklin and many of the framers, not founders, the founders are states, the framers were those who helped pave the way and contributed to our evolution of this society to come to the greatest republic ever created. But anyway, if you read through what the framers had said, they believed that the only way we would be able to restore our liberties and sovereignty would be through revolution. We'd have to fight for them back. I believe, and all the framers also affirmed, that the Lord definitely inspired them and granted them the insights in writing this document. And that's why I quickly will make the assertion that the Constitution is scripture for the governance of mankind, not the salvation of mankind. We need to go to the Holy Scriptures for that. But for the governance of mankind, the Lord inspired these great men with his insights so that they could create a form of government that had the process to heal itself. And this is the miracle, my friends, that we do not have to fight a revolt to regain our liberties. All we have to do is get those who have the authority and power over this over this general government, over this inferior entity we call the federal government, who they believe and have asserted for 2 centuries that they're superior in all things. I clearly point out that they're not. They're only superior in those things delegated to them. They're not superior in energy, agriculture, and all those things, because those things were not constitutionally delegated. They've just assumed them and usurped them. And because it's a contract, the insights of the framers and the Lord in allowing this to become a contract, we've basically have handed to us a self-healing process where the states can step in and save the day without having to fire a shot or without having to lift a finger in a revolt and shed any blood. Anyway, in the historical narrative, I also point out, how Christianity and the evolution of Christianity into the Enlightenment and so forth basically paved the way for the founding of this nation. And I can show you all sorts of things regarding liberty, and I challenge most people's paradigms regarding evolution, the theory of the secular progressives, and the concept of education and so forth, and the anthropology, the sciences that have been rammed down our throats. Through this very first section, I challenge those things, and I identify as well opposing forces to liberty, that being communism, Islam, and those types of things that are seeking to subjugate mankind. And right out from underneath our nose, there's all sorts of pernicious people with machinations or evil designs to undermine our Constitution and get us to abandon it. And so that's why it's really imperative that I spoke about this historical narrative on liberty. The second section in my book I speak of, is regarding the innovation of this new nation and what the framers really did. And I go through the different forms of government and how they, why did they create a bicameral Congress, and how that Connecticut Compromise was so critical. In this second section, I clearly lay out what was delivered by our framers and what was accepted by the states or the founders. The third section is the obfuscation of the Constitution, who done it and why. And I believe that a lot of the people that did some of the obfuscation did it with noble intent. I think that John Marshall and Alexander Hamilton and some of the things that they were pushing us unconstitutionally towards were maybe noble in their eyes, but was a violation of what was accepted and what was ratified by the states. The fourth section in the first book is the constitutional fix. And in that, I call it an Article 5 convention, but I'm incorrect in saying that. So in the second book, which is the fifth section, at the very beginning, I clarify that I'm talking about trying to follow the Article 5 process and holding the Article 5 process as the standard or the litmus test on any of the powers that are being exercised by the federal government. And what I mean by that is, if the federal government is exercising a power, did they follow the Article 5 process and send out to the states for ratification the ability to take on a new role, responsibility, or power? Those powers being the Department of Justice, those powers being the Department of Agriculture, Labor, Commerce, transportation. I mean, I had that whole list that I've gone through before, and I just don't have it in front of me. But all of these departments that have been created, energy, education, health and human services, HUD, and Homeland Security, FBI, all of these types of powers that the federal government has assumed, there's not one amendment to the Constitution that's granting them these powers. And so the constitutional fix is strictly the simplicity of the contract itself, and it's to audit it, to convene a convention or to convene the body of states to audit the Constitution. So if you get my first book, you will read all the minute details to this and why academically we can do this. In my second book, I get into how many people it will take and in conducting, to move this nation into conducting republic review. The second book is really, and I had no plan in writing it, but it became the obvious next book, because everybody kept on asking me, well, how are we going to do this? How do you do this? And so I actually sat down and wrote out the strategy of how to do this, because I had it in my mind. And in this process, we don't need to get thousands and the majority of the state all on board. What we need to get is our representatives to recognize their responsibility and replace them with those who have a profound understanding of the Constitution and what is at play here. Our legislatures we can replace every 2 years in the state house. And so if we're not happy with their inability to protect us from federal tyranny, then we need to replace them and get somebody to stand up as a constitutionalist and get them in there so that they can pursue and start pushing for this audit. This won't take long, folks. And as a matter of fact, in my second book, I even mention, and I still stand by this, I look at all the different conservative entertainers who have such a great reach. The one guy that has the power of doing this is the guy that controls a body of media, the news and so forth, and has, I believe, the apparatus of doing this. And I say it in my book. If Glenn Beck, could garner this concept of Republic Review and the application of holding the federal government to the constraints of the Constitution and that Article 5 process and how they violated it, we can easily get this movement towards the Republic Review, auditing the Constitution, on track within months.